My name is Rick Brown. I've been researching and collecting the Lincoln assassination for 48 years now. This presentation is about Michigan's connection to the aftermath of the Lincoln assassination. Two people in particular, Luther Baker and Lafayette Baker. They spent part of their childhood, grew up in Lansing, Michigan, and after the Civil War, they both moved back to Lansing, purchased various properties, and lived out their life. Now, Luther and Lafayette Baker were two key players in the finding and capture of John Wilkes Booth. Luther Baker was Lafayette Baker's cousin. Luther Baker is the man that, when you see in the movies or the documentaries, the military person out there shouting to Booth, "Come on out, we got you surrounded, surrender," etc. That was Luther Byron Baker. And after Booth was shot, he's also the one that helped drag Booth out of the burning barn and put him on the porch of the Garrett farm. And throughout the night he stayed with him, gave him drinks of water now and then, and then the next morning he died. After that, in October of 1865, the conspirators were hung in July. In October of 1865, Luther moves back to Lansing, purchases a small farm of 5.6 acres in Lansing on the outskirts of town. And the screwy part is he paid $8,000 for that farm. There was only a house and a barn on it. It did not include any livestock or crops. Now, in researching, other farms of the same size right next to the inn were only selling for $150 to $250. So the quandary becomes, or enigma, why would he pay $8,000 for a property that's only worth $200 or $300? And in fact, a year and a half later, he decided he can't make it as a living farming, so he sold the farm for $250. And he got a job as assistant adjutant general in the state of Michigan Capitol building. Lafayette Baker is somebody else. It's strange. During the Civil War, Lafayette was hired by Secretary of War Stanton as his own private detective. At the time Lincoln was assassinated, Lafayette Baker was in New York City doing some work for Stanton. Well, the night after the assassination, Stanton ordered 5,000 troops virtually to go house to house, barn to barn, every one of them in the entire state of Virginia and Maryland. 12 days later, they still hadn't found Booth or any of the other conspirators that they thought was with Booth at the time. So Stanton sends a wire telegram to Lafayette Baker in New York City, "Come help me find John Wilkes Booth." Lafayette sends a telegram back to Stanton requesting that his cousin Luther head up the military and recruit the 16th New York Regiment to go find Booth. Well, in less than a day, from leaving Washington, D.C., they find Booth in Garrett's farm in his barn. Now wait a minute, you got 5,000 troops going out door to door, house to house, barn to barn, and they can't find him, but yet this one man finds him in less than a day? That also seems kind of strange to me. But Lafayette gets even more puzzling. 1857, just prior to the Civil War, Lafayette Baker purchased 3 properties in downtown Lansing, Michigan, with just 2 blocks from the Capitol building. Prime site, a lot of stores there. He purchased all 3 properties total for $285. But after the Civil War, 1865, he moves back to Lansing, purchases a couple of other properties, but within 6 months of moving back to Lansing, he sells the 3 properties that he bought from the state for $285 to Hiram Sibley for $10,000. Now, Hiram Sibley was the largest agriculture dealer in the United States, selling seeds and plows and various things that farmers needed. 2 weeks later, he sells the same 3 properties to O.F. Winchester of the Winchester Rifles fame. He sells it to him for $30,900, the same 3 properties. And a few months later, he sells the same 3 properties to a third man, John Longyear, who was a senator for the state of Michigan. He sells it to him for $60,000. So we're looking at what? Neighborhood of $100,000, the same property from 3 different people? How do you do that? 2 of the 3 people ended up suing, and I have the court papers. Winchester and Sibley ended up suing Lafayette to recover their money. There was some kind of fraud going on. Obviously selling the same property to 3 different people for huge amounts, but beyond that, Lafayette unfortunately died in Philadelphia in 1868. After Lafayette died, Winchester dropped his lawsuit against his wife, Jane Baker. But Hiram Sibley continued with his lawsuit. 6 years later, Lafayette Baker's wife was ordered to pay Sibley $14,000. Another interesting fact here with Michigan, the 4th Michigan Cavalry out of Detroit was the unit that found and captured Jefferson Davis. There was also a $100,000 reward on the finding Jefferson Davis. When they captured him, the press made a big thing out of it because supposedly Jefferson Davis was in a woman's dress and a woman's hood to disguise himself to be able to go around without being discovered who he was. But the 4th Michigan Cavalry did discover who he was and returned him back to Washington, D.C. National Archives has a file they call the Baker Papers, Lafayette C. Baker Papers. It fills 137 microfilm reels. I've only been through a couple of reels so far, so obviously this is a work in progress, but as it is, I've got at least 45-minute presentation I can give on the Bakers and the 4th Michigan Cavalry.